1600 to 1650. Children were considered small adults, and parents were ultimately responsible for education. John Amos Comenius was considered the father of modern education. And Ode de Luther Satan Act required towns of 50 families to hire a schoolmaster to teach their children reading and writing. Towns of 100 or more had to create grammar schools. 1650 to 1700, Age of Enlightenment began in Europe. It caused a curiosity for science and the scientific method. During this time, only men could teach. John Locke was a philosopher during this time who proposed the idea that knowledge is obtained through sensation and reflection, and everyone has that capacity. Therefore, education should not be restricted to a certain class or gender. And John Amos Comenius introduced a number of educational innovations, including pictorial books in native languages. 1700 to 1750. During this time, a more favorable romantic view of children emerged. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was a philosopher during this time, and he was recognized as giving the characteristic idea of romanticism. Art, the free expression of the creative spirit, is more important than strict adherence to formal rules. He also promoted indirect manipulation of children's will. Johann Pestalozzi believed that teaching methods should be designed for the student's own abilities. He also says that it should start from familiar to the new. Late 1700s. It was thought once the colonies gained independence that the schools should be public to all and not based on religion. Pestalozzi valued interaction, hands-on exploration, and reflection as educational methods. Benjamin Franklin opened Philadelphia Academy, and he was an inventor and educator in his time. Thomas Jefferson advocated for education for the common man. He said public schools should be free. Early 1800s. During this time, kindergarten is born. Friedrich Froebel founded the first kindergarten in Germany. It was originally called Child Nurture and Activity Institute. He also had a publishing firm for play and other educational materials, including nursery songs. Catherine Beecher and her sister founded Hartford Female Seminary in Connecticut. She was committed to advocating for women to teach. Horace Mann was the Secretary of Education in Massachusetts, and he felt there was a lot of issues in public education. In the late 1800s, there were only 12 normal state schools in the country. Emily Peabody promoted Froebel's methods in America and created the first Froebel Society. Edward Austin Sheldon was responsible for Oswego Primary Teachers Training School in 1861. And Emma Wright was in the forefront of education for women and young girls. In the early 1900s, the scientific approaches were becoming more popular versus religion. And because kindergarten became more academic, some educators re-emphasized the importance of play. Most schools were still in rural areas, so they only went for the first couple of years. G. Stanley Hall and Arnold Gesell were both responsible for creating the child study movement. And Lev Vygotsky emphasized language acquisition as key influence on cognitive development. He also believed that social and cultural influences greatly impacted children's development. In the late 1900s, schools were still segregated by race, which caused a lot to feel white children had an advantage. And also, with the development of technology, educators saw great potential for TV as a learning tool. Progressivism sparked as the Soviet satellite was launched in 1957, which caused a refocus on math and science. Jean Pageant analyzed children's problem-solving processes, and defined distinct stages of children's cognitive development. Caroline Pratt, a follower of Paget's theories, started the play school movement. She believed children learned and constructed meaning through play. Lucy Prague Mitchell co-founded the Bureau of Education Experiments to study and develop optimal learning environments for children. In the mid-80s, Apple computers had a foothold in the education system. Use of computers allowed teachers to teach basic skills to their students. And Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 was signed by Lyndon Johnson. Its goal was to provide additional resources to low-income students. 2000 to present. Beginning in the early 2000s, there was a greater emphasis on a new form of education called STEM, short for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The use of projectors, computers, and other forms of technology were being integrated. In 2001, the No Child Left Behind Act started. It was proposed that federal aid be used to hold schools more accountable for educational outcomes of their students. The individual education plans that came through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act of 2004 was shown to help the children who had disabilities that needed the extra time. Dana Ravitch was the Assistant Secretary of Education under George H.W. Bush, and she was very vocal and influenced by many people in her time. She was in the public eye fighting against educational corporate reforms. I think the biggest hit we took in our education system recently is COVID. They had to start learning remotely. They had to learn to teach remotely. And when schools did open back up, there was a high percentage of kids who didn't even go back to school at all. This was a very interesting project to take on.